So today we're actually going to be talking about a recipe and spicing it up, but a recipe that relies on canned veggies and beans, but that you can definitely add fresh produce to. So I will say, y'all know that we are huge fans of fresh, local, school-grown produce, but we did want to be a little bit responsive to the times, plus recognizing that we live in Chicago and that especially in the early spring or in the winter, we don't really have access to fresh fruits and vegetables that are grown in other parts of the world at particular times of the year. So we're going to be featuring a recipe today about, it's a zucchini, corn, and black bean salad. And while we talk through this recipe, I just want you to take note. I love that a lot of y'all like to spice up your recipes. So I want you to think through how you might adjust this recipe, particularly using some of that spring produce we mentioned.
So is any of this stuff?
Okay, cool. I'm back. So adding spring produce like the pea shoots, arugula, lettuce, radishes, turnips, and spinach. I saw someone added in the chat box that they made guacamole with their students and added cilantro and radishes they planted. I love that. So yeah, just thinking through how we can add to recipes using Learning Garden produce or using seasonal produce. Note any substitutions that can be made. And then also, we're not in school right now, but in the future, if you did want to take on some classroom cooking, thinking through how this recipe in particular might work for a classroom environment. So I'm going to just show you the recipe and give you a minute to read through it. So a few things to note about this recipe. Some of the items are noted that you could use canned or frozen produce, which is really great. As far as the optional ingredients, those may be things that you have around, or you may just want to omit them altogether. As far as preparing this recipe, if you were to do it with a school or a classroom, the main thing we'd want to do for prep is just sauteing and chopping that zucchini up. But all the rest of the steps beyond the chopping, of course, depending on the age of your students, all the measuring and mixing would be great to do with students, as well as having them taste the recipe and then decide if they want to add those optional ingredients. That's a really good practice for classroom cooking. And then, of course, at the bottom, we add any available greens or herbs from your learning garden. The one on here that we haven't really talked about yet, so pea shoots, lettuce, radishes, chives, would be green garlic. So again, green garlic is the very young garlic that you may have popping up in your home garden or in your school garden right now. And that actually is edible and is super delicious too. They have really tender leaves that you can actually taste and eat. It's kind of like the texture of a green onion, but it's garlic, so it's really delicious. But yeah, again, students can do the mixing, they can rip up herbs with their hands. All these things are really great for student participation. So why are we talking about using canned or frozen produce? So there's a lot of benefits actually to using this type of food. One thing is that it's cost effective, especially out of season. Another thing is that the produce has actually been harvested at its peak ripeness. So contrary to like some people believe that there's actually a decrease in nutrients from canned or frozen produce, but actually because it's been harvested at its ideal ripeness, it retains a lot of those nutrients because it's essentially harvested right away and then preserved. It's a great way to enjoy fruits and veggies out of season, or enjoy those tropical fruits that we love, even though we live in the Midwest. A really big one, especially when thinking about classroom cooking, is the decreased prep time. So produce that you get in a can or frozen is often peeled and pre-chopped. So two really good examples of that would be, first of all, pumpkin. So thinking about a big pumpkin that you would get fresh and how much time it takes to process that. So cutting it open, which is hard, removing the seeds, getting rid of the outside peel and everything. That takes a long time. It's a really fun activity when you're up for it. But canned pumpkin is equally as delicious and functions the same in most recipes. Another great example of the decreased prep time, one that I love to eat is mango. And I really don't like chopping the mango and taking out the pit and peeling it. But frozen mango is a really great option and has decreased prep time exponentially, for me at least. And then another one to think about is the actual food waste that you're having to handle from your end. So when it's prepped and processed, you know, from the distributor, they're managing all that food waste. Whereas again, with the pumpkin, if you're doing that at home, you might have to either, if you're lucky enough to have compost all of that excess, or otherwise just throw it in the garbage. So again, yeah, think of ways you can dress up recipes using canned or frozen produce where you're not gonna notice that textural difference. So things like adding things to it, adding fresh crisp greens or herbs, adding chopped veggies to crisp everything up, or just using recipes that you don't really notice the difference. So things like smoothies, dips, and spreads, and slaws. And again, this can just really increase the convenience of cooking, especially in a classroom environment. So some of the best canned options are of course beans, we all know and love, corn, pumpkins, and tomatoes are a really good one to get canned. And then, yeah, just a note about the tomatoes, they actually have more lycopene when they're canned, so they have more of the antioxidant that tomatoes are known for. And that's because the canning process, they need to heat the tomatoes. So canned tomatoes actually have more lycopene than fresh tomatoes, which is interesting. Just a few things to look out for, especially if you're gonna buy canned fruit. So the can on the left is packed in 100% juice, and the can on the right in tiny print tells you that it actually has a heavy syrup. So anytime a company is advertising that it's in a syrup, that means that fruit is gonna have a lot of added sugar. So if you are looking to avoid that added sugar, just make sure you look for ones that are packed in 100% juice. Another thing to look out for, especially with our veggies, is the excess salt. So I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about what to look out for in the labeling for salt. But if you do have something with salt, you can rinse it. Just note that rinsing sometimes takes away some of the vitamins that have leached into the water, but otherwise rinsing and soaking are totally good to get rid of some of that excess salt. And then you also just want to note, again, the texture changes that might happen through the canning process. So here's my little slide about salt and sodium. So sodium is an essential nutrient for our body. It's one that we all need, but due to the American diet, most of us usually get plenty of sodium. It's something we get in abundance. So for many people, limiting sodium is a common goal. So I've listed here the actual recommended maximum daily intake, which is 2,300 milligrams per day. So it's not recommended that you get that much. It's recommended you get no more than that much. And so I have 3 different cans of green beans here. One has no salt, one is with salt, and one has low sodium. And just note the different amounts of sodium that means. So the one with salt actually has 300 milligrams of sodium, which is about 13% of your maximum daily intake. And that's for a ½ cup serving. So again, sodium is essential for our diet, but sometimes you want to think about what when you're sacrificing flavor for sodium, when like an example of canned beans, you're getting a lot of sodium, but that's not actually adding a lot of flavor to your beans. So if you are looking to avoid sodium, you can always look for, or avoid excess sodium rather, you can always look for a label that says reduced salt, reduced sodium, or there are definitely cans available that have no salt added. And we'll of course add some follow-up resources with some more information about this as well.